All right, let's dive into one of the biggest questions in moral philosophy, utilitarianism. Now, it's a really influential theory with a pretty simple goal, but it splits right down the middle into two rival camps, act versus rule. And trust me, the conflict between them is going to make you question everything you think you know about making the right choice.
But hey, before we get into all the theory, let's just start with a basic question. Seriously, think about it for a second. What actually makes an action right or wrong? Is it about what you meant to do? Is it about following some kind of cosmic duty? Well, utilitarianism comes along and offers a totally different answer, one that's incredibly clear and, for a lot of people, really, really compelling.
And that compelling answer? It's all about the consequences. So, to really get the split between act and rule utilitarianism, we first have to get our heads around the one big idea they both share, the greatest happiness principle.
Okay, so at its heart, utilitarianism is a type of consequentialism. That's just a fancy word that means the morality of anything you do is judged by its outcome. By the results. It's not about your good intentions. It's not about following some ancient set of commandments. It's all about what your actions actually do in the world.
So what's the result we're aiming for here? The goal is to maximize what philosophers call utility. Think of utility as just the total amount of good that's produced minus all the bad. In other words, the goal is simple: make the world a happier place with less suffering.
The classic utilitarian Jeremy Bentham, he summed it all up with this famous phrase: the right action is the one that creates the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It's pretty straightforward, right? Imagine you're throwing a party for 10 friends. 7 of them absolutely love chocolate ice cream, 3 love vanilla. You can only get 1 tub. A utilitarian would say, easy, you get the chocolate. Why? Because that choice maximizes the total happiness of the group, even if you happen to be a vanilla fan yourself. Simple, powerful. But, and this is a big but, once you start trying to apply this simple principle to the real world, a huge crack starts to appear. The question becomes, how exactly do we go about maximizing happiness? And this, right here, is where utilitarianism splits into 2 totally different schools of thought.
And this brings us to the main event. You've got team act versus team rule. On one side, you have act utilitarianism. The idea here is to apply that greatest happiness principle to every single action, on a case-by-case basis. Before you do anything, you ask, will this specific thing I'm about to do create the most good right now? Then, on the other side, you have rule utilitarianism. They look at the case-by-case approach and say, well, that's just chaos. They argue we should instead figure out general rules that, if everybody followed them, would create the most happiness in the long run. The question isn't about your one little act, it's about the rule behind it.
So let's dig into act utilitarianism first. I mean, on the surface, it makes a lot of sense, right? It seems like the most direct, logical way to apply the core principle. If your whole goal is to maximize good, why wouldn't you try to do that in every single instance? And the appeal is definitely strong. For one, it's super flexible. It throws out rigid, absolute rules like never lie or never steal. An act utilitarian would say, hang on, what if lying could save someone's life? In that one case, lying is obviously the right thing to do. This case-by-case approach is always laser-focused on producing the best possible outcome. Plus, it gives you a kind of objective way to make moral decisions. You just calculate the most likely consequences and go with the best.
Okay, but this is exactly where the problems start to creep in. Because the biggest challenge for act utilitarianism is that a cold, hard calculation of the best outcome can sometimes lead to answers that just feel deeply, intuitively wrong.
Here's a classic thought experiment. Imagine a city is being torn apart by deadly riots. People are dying, buildings are burning. A judge knows for a fact that she can stop all of it by framing one innocent person for a crime they didn't commit. This one conviction will calm everyone down and save dozens of lives. Now, an act utilitarian, just crunching the numbers, they might have to conclude that punishing the innocent person is the right call. The suffering of one person is outweighed by the well-being of many. But for most of us, that just feels horrifically wrong.
Or how about this one? A doctor has 5 patients. All of them are about to die unless they get an organ transplant. Just then, a perfectly healthy person walks in for a routine checkup. And what do you know? They're a perfect match for all 5. So, does the doctor kill the one healthy person to save the 5 who are dying? Again, a pure case-by-case calculation says yes, 5 lives saved for 1 life lost. That's a net gain in utility. But we all just recoil from that idea. We believe a doctor's first duty is to do no harm.
And these extreme examples point to a much, much bigger problem. If everyone was an act utilitarian, always willing to break any rule for what they think is a better outcome,
The very fabric of our society could completely unravel. How could you ever trust a judge? How could you trust your doctor? If someone makes you a promise, how would you know they won't just break it the second they calculate that doing something else would create just a tiny bit more good? Trust, stability, predictability, it would all just be gone.
And this is exactly where rule utilitarianism comes riding to the rescue. Its supporters say that these horrifying examples show precisely why that case-by-case approach is so dangerous. The solution isn't to give up on utilitarianism, but to focus on the incredible power of good rules.
So here's the absolute crucial point for a rule utilitarian. We get the greatest overall happiness, not by trying to calculate every single act, but by establishing and then following a moral code, a set of rules that have been shown to generate the most good for society over the long haul.
The rules of the road analogy is honestly the perfect way to think about this. So imagine a stop sign. An act utilitarian might pull up to an empty intersection at 3 in the morning and think, literally no one is here. Stopping does no good, so I'm just going to blow right through it. But a rule utilitarian says, whoa, hold on. The rule, always stop at stop signs, prevents way more accidents and suffering than the tiny inconvenience it causes. And since we humans are actually pretty terrible at judging risk in the heat of the moment, having a simple, reliable rule creates a much safer society for everyone. Following that rule is what really maximizes utility in the long run. So let's go back and see how this approach fixes all our earlier problems. The right rule is, do not punish the innocent, because a society where judges can just frame people is a society that lives in constant fear. The right rule is, doctors must do no harm, because if people couldn't trust their doctors, they'd stop going to hospitals and way more people would suffer and die. And the right rule is, keep your promises, because that's the bedrock of cooperation that holds our entire society together. In every single one of these cases, sticking to the rule creates way more total happiness than allowing for those dangerous exceptions.
So it sounds like rule utilitarianism fixes everything, right? It's the clear winner? Well, not quite. The debate is far from over, because the act utilitarians have a really powerful comeback. And the core tension boils down to a classic conflict: flexibility versus stability.
It really all comes down to this. The strength of Team ACT is its incredible flexibility to get the best outcome in every single situation, but its weakness is that it can justify horrible things and destroy trust. The strength of Team Rule is that it creates a stable, predictable society we can all live in, but its weakness? Critics call it rule worship. I mean, what happens when following a rule is just obviously painfully wrong? If the rule is never lie, but an axe murderer knocks on your door and asks where your friend is hiding, a strict rule follower is forced to tell the truth, and that just seems insane. You're worshiping the rule even when breaking it would clearly do so much more good.
And look, this is not just some abstract debate for philosophy class. It leaves us with very real, very modern dilemmas. Think about programming the ethics of a self-driving car. In an accident that it can't avoid, should we program that car to follow absolute rules, like never swerve onto a sidewalk no matter what? Or should we program it to be an act utilitarian, to calculate, in a millisecond, which crash will result in the least amount of harm, even if that means breaking a rule and sacrificing its own passenger to save a group of pedestrians? The debate between act and rule utilitarianism is happening right now, in the computer code that's going to be driving on our roads very soon. So which one would you choose?